Okay. Well, good afternoon, first of all, in a very formal way now. For those of you who don't know me, I think anyone already attending this seminar series knows me, but my name is Cristina Gámez Fernández, and I am a senior lecturer at the University of Córdoba. The session, as you know, is recorded with the purpose of sharing our work to the wider segments of society through the YouTube channel of our research project. In this sense, feel very welcome and invited to visit the YouTube channel we have and see the two other previous seminars that we already held. Of course, this is a non-profit activity, so I am recording the session for this reason. Of course, this is a seminar series which is called Explorations of Hope in the Capitalocene, Critical Theory in Literary and Cultural Research. And the series has been designed as an activity carried out by the members of the National Research Project called Resisting the Capitalocene, Narratives of Hope in the 21st Century, which was recently granted by the Spanish Ministry of Science, Innovation and Universities. This series features 4 different seminars delivered by team members in which we propose different critical texts in order to think about their potential for our research. Why 4 seminars in particular and not 5 and not 2? Because this is an activity that we would normally do privately among the team members as part of our regular research in the project. And the reason behind this is that the project is organized around 4 different working packages, which deal with different thematic areas that we discuss as a team. However, in our desire to share the work we do with society at no cost and to provide educational materials that can be of potential interest to wider audiences, we offer this meeting as a seminar, which can be followed by anyone with a video conferencing link. And in this sense, we're also offering this activity as free formative seminar for doctoral students enrolled in the doctoral program called Lenguas y Culturas, in English, Languages and Cultures. This is a doctoral inter-university program supported by the University of Córdoba, the University of Extremadura, the University of Huelva, and the University of Jaén. The 4 participants attending to all seminars will obtain certification from the program. Today's session, titled Geographies of Hope and Love, will be held by my colleagues and friends, Doctors Gallego Durán and Silvia Castro Borrego. Let me briefly introduce you to these 2 scholars. Gallego Durán is a full professor of American and African American literature at the University of Huelva, where she has worked since 1996. She's been a visitor professor at Northwestern, Harvard, and Cornell universities in the USA, at the Universidad Simón Bolívar in Colombia, and at several European universities. Believe me that I've got the list here, and it is like 3-4 lines of universities. Long list. She is currently the director of the Cátedra Clara Campoamor of Gender Studies, which is a collaboration between the University of Huelva and the Diputación de Huelva. Her research focuses on African diaspora literature, especially contemporary women writers, and gender and migration studies. She is the author of numerous articles and book chapters, as well as books. I've got here a couple of books: Passing Novels in the Harlem Renaissance, published by Lit Verlag in 2003, and this title in Spanish, A ambas orillas del Atlántico, Geografías de Hogar y Diáspora en Autoresas Afrodescendientes, published by KRK Ediciones in 2016. She has also co-edited several volumes on gender studies, but I would like to call your attention on her latest research, which I have in this other screen here. She just published a book chapter in a very recent publication. It is a book entitled The African American Novel in the Early 21st Century. And here she collaborated with the following chapter: Hey Celestial, Loving Girls and Aging in Toni Morrison's Love. I just wanted to, call the attention to this other publication. And our next speaker will be Silvia Castro Borrego, who is a lecturer of English in North American literature and culture at the University of Malaga. Her main research focuses on the literary expressions on the African diaspora, covering the 20th and the 21st centuries, giving special emphasis to transatlantic connections and the contributions of Africans in Europe and the Americas, and of Europe and the African diaspora worldwide. She is a member of the research group Teoría y Estudios Culturales at the University of Huelva, and she has participated in several research projects. She is now working in our research project, by the way, and has done research at the University of Washington in Seattle with a pre-doctoral grant, and at Spelman College in Atlanta as a postdoctoral fellow. Among her latest publication is her article, and I think that we might find some of the ideas that she will be commenting on today, maybe in this publication. And it is this article called Conscious Evolution and the Expanding of Consciousness in Paul Marshall's Fiction, which was published in Miscellanea Journal. Well, the dynamics of the session will start with Mar Gallego's presentation of Stefan Skrimshire introduction to his book, Politics of Fear, Practices of Hope. This book was published in 2008, and it will follow Silvia Castro's presentation of Ken Wilber's article, An Integral Theory of Consciousness. Questions will be thrown to the audience at the end jointly. So we will have the chance of debating on the questions that the two speakers posed at the end of the session. Hopefully this way of organizing questions will create more interaction between both texts. So I think that this is all I wanted to say. Feel very welcome, both presenters and people joining us today. And of course, without further ado, Mar, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. I have to say first that it's an immense pleasure to present together with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Silvia Castro, today, but also it is a real pleasure to be part of this wonderful team of scholars. And of course, to be talking about something that is really dear to us, which is hope and love. So I think this is to start off from there. One other thing before I start with my presentation, I have to acknowledge is that the title for it, or part of the title for it, came actually from reading an article by Beatriz Hermida Ramos, which is actually titled Geographies of Hope, reading Becky Chambers' Record of Space-Born Few, which I actually recommend, especially the part about educated hope. It really got me thinking about that. And of course, all her reflection on utopias and imperfect utopias, especially. Okay, so let me just start with the presentation. Okay, can you see it okay? Wonderful.
Yes, Mar, we can perfectly.
Okay, and I was trying to go to the, let me see, there you go. So you can see it better, wonderful. Okay, this is part of our presentation. So basically, Christina already mentioned the way we are going to be functioning today. First, I will be talking about Stefan Skrimshire, brief notes actually about his biography, his main publications, and then we will concentrate on his reading for today, or in the introduction to Politics of Fear and Practices of Hope. And then Silvia Castro will also deal with Ken Wilber's biography, main publications, and then she will illustrate us with her interpretation of a dense text for the reading, which is an integral theory of consciousness, right? And finally, at the end, we will have the questions. So this is him. This is Stefan Skrimshire. He's a professor of theology and religious studies at the University of Leeds. He actually obtained his Bachelor of Arts at the University of Durham, his MA and PhD at the University of Manchester. And it's really interesting how to define him. And I will tell you how he defines himself in a moment, okay? But I would say basically that I would define him as a philosopher, a cultural theorist, and an essayist. The topics of interest, very similar in a way to what we saw in the previous seminar, and actually we will see many beautiful connections to the previous seminar, the second seminar. He is also interested in philosophy, Catholic theology, and ethics. But how he defines himself in his webpage, you have it there. The topics of interest for him are political theology, eco-theology, continental philosophy of religion, including critical theory. That's why I think he's very much into critical theory, I would say. And then environmental humanities and extinction studies that have been actually a late development of his previous research interests. Okay, his main publications. He is a very prolific author, actually, and I'm going to be talking first about his 3 books. The latest one with Kidwell, which is, you see, a very recent book from last year, Extinction and Religion. Then his 2012 Politics of Fear, Practices of Hope, which is the one that we are going to be obviously focusing on today. And then his previous one in 2010, Future Ethics. And I just wanted to also showcase some of his other contributions, like in journal articles or book chapters, because I think they're really interesting. For example, you see Extinction in Grounding Religion, so how he obviously links all the extinction studies to religion and religious developments. Then we will talk a little bit about Apocalypse 2, and you have the 2022 Apocalyptic Time and the Ethics of Human Extinction, which is something we're going to see over and over. This production is obviously the important ethical component of his publications. And then, of course, activism, another key word for his work. Activism for end times. Okay, so I think that he will be also very keen on discussing a climate emergency, as we will also see in the interpretation of the text today. And then you see climate change, Anthropocene fever memory, and the planetary archive. So you can see where his main, as I said, concerns are actually leading him to. Okay, let me then concentrate now on the introduction of politics of fear, practices of hope. Actually, what I wanted to say right away is that we actually think that we would really need to read the whole text. That's why, I guess, that's why where the confusion derived from, in a way, was this idea that I think, or we think, that this text is actually fundamental in for the purposes of our project and for the purposes of designing politics of hope, practices of hope, in fact, right? So I think that we may need to actually really take this book into account. Okay, if you have been in previous seminars, you will see actually that there are many common elements in my talk, and of course in Silvia's talk, but especially in the first part of my talk about the introduction. Because what Skrimshire is very much intent on doing in his work is to actually start from the premise, I would say, of the crisis in plural, in understanding hope, but also of how to, to go beyond those crises. And I think this is really the relevant part for us, hopers, hope scholars, right? So let's contextualize where he's actually coming from. He says at the very beginning of the introduction that obviously our present world, and it's scary. I don't know if you had the same feeling while I was rereading this text. Like, the feeling was how up to date this text is. And he wrote it in 2008, to think about it, no? This politics of fear with obviously the outside forces. Well, just name them, right? Terrorism, pandemics, global warming. I mean, this is our present world. I know it's a very good description of our present reality. No, but also I think it's also quite revealing that he talks about how in the postmodern world we tend to conform. He doesn't say conformity, but I would say this is the postmodern conformity. He talks about the culture of acquiescence and non-participation. I talk a little bit more about perhaps, as I was saying, conformity, but also of indifference. How can we? We just don't have the luxury of conformity or indifference in our present dire straits. And he also obviously mentions the war on terror. Remember, this was 2008, and increased militarization. What are we listening to all the time in the news in the last few months, last few years, right? Especially with the EU claims about the need for increased militarization to defend ourselves. We can debate that if you want later on. But it's the outside forces, it's true, but also the, I would say, the inside sources. And there I would say it has to do with this normalization, which I find also very scary. I don't know about you, but I find it very scary, the normalization of the state of social anxiety. Everybody's anxious, and we tend to say this more in our conversations, but we cannot remain there. We need to do more about it, but we will discuss it if you want later. So all of these politics of fear are actually leading clearly to the so-called culture of despair. Here we have the threats to survival. We have seen it already, but also with the addition, which is unfortunately also quite contemporary, quite happening right now while we are talking, right, of a nuclear war, and of course of an ecological collapse. And what I think is even more complicated, I mean, I'm not saying that all of this was not complicated, but it's the idea that we have lost faith. We have lost, in a way, hope, no? Because there is this suspicion thought over the narratives of faith. And I would add, as I said, the narratives of faith and hope, and we will talk about it in more detail in a few moments. It's as if he says there were no alternative to neoliberalism, and the categories we may or may find not forward-thinking categories such as progress, revolution, and evolution are in a way are more and more suppressed, silenced, and not fashionable in a way. And of course, we need to think why this is it. No, this is the reason behind all of this. It's not that I'm particularly a king, and you will see that on any kind of linear progress narrative. But as I said, we can also take this up later in the debate. We also mentioned, this was in the first seminar, this was also in the second seminar, that we cannot equate hope to optimism and positive outlook. Hope is not optimism in a very clear sense of the word. And of course, it's not only being positive about whatever happens to us or what happens to the world, etc., etc. Actually here, and this is your page 3, we have Mary Sornazi talking about the decline in interest in hope as a philosophical concept. So this is why we need to be very aware that this is crisis in understanding also hope as a philosophical, and I would say not only philosophical concept. Okay, so that is to start from there. So what is hope? No, we have been trying to delineate the contours of hope for a long time. For the different texts and authors we have been dealing with in the previous seminars. Well, I don't know if I'm being simplistic here, but this is what resonated in me when I was rereading Skrimshire. Well, hope is clearly, and I will insist on this, a call for political action. And of course, therefore, it's absolutely intimately linked to activism. And he also relates it to some very important concept or notion, which is the notion of resistance and the narratives of resistance and the practices of resistance. Enough. He does mention it, but I think that was my main contention is that I wanted love to be more present, but we will make it, of course, very present as we go by. Okay, so these are like very, as I said, very like introductory definition of what hope means for Skrimshire. So let's complicate it a little bit, talking about another notion that for me is also inspiring, no matter what, which is the belief in living in hope, which is, I think, part of this, what's the word, of this indifference in the present world, this idea that that is naive, no, or people who believe in living in hope are naive people. Very simplistic, not elaborate enough. I don't know. We have really read this before. So that obviously takes us to the other notions that I find absolutely relevant, which is obviously we have talked about resistance already, but and action. But what about creativity? I heard somebody this week actually talking about the fact that either human beings, and of course we will in a minute talk about Bloch's contribution, right? But either we human beings are creative enough or creative in general, or or we will be extinct, literally. And this is something that Skrimshire, for Skrimshire, is an evident belief too. And one of the crucial references, and I think that's why this seminar today very nicely ties up to the previous one, is that Bloch is obviously this key, crucial reference. When, of course, thinking about a hope as future-oriented, we have talked about this, right? Future-oriented as, pregnant with possibility. So that's part of how we may understand and encourage forms of hope. In imagining, and we will talk about more in a minute too, in imagining a future, a different kind of future, pregnant with possibility. Bloch, remember, talks a lot about the lack, really, of resources to counteract the culture of despair, and how fear, the impact of fear is that it actually silences all the aspirations and hopes innate to human beings. So I'm not very, as you know me, you have heard me before, I'm not very much into, innate ideas, but I would certainly agree with Bloch there. We human beings are, and not only human beings, but I'm referring to Bloch's contribution, especially here in as far as human beings are concerned, right? Human beings are creative, and human beings are hopeful, aspire to better, healthier forms of life. And you have here key terms for Bloch: not yet a conscious, not yet become, but everything. I think all this model is presided, obviously, over by the notion of action, by the utopias, and that's why I was referring to utopia right at the beginning of my talk, and of course of autonomy, which is another, I think, key idea. Sorry, I need to go back too quickly here. Right. Next, okay. What we have next is share notions of utopias. What kind of utopias are there? And he concretely refers to political utopianism. There seems to be, obviously, a utopian, radical utopia, I would say, up to one point, which is an antidote to late capitalism, obviously drawing from Jason's criticism. And then what is called the anti-utopia, or Skrimshire defines as anti-utopia politics of violence, which it also derives from Gray's work. And he refers basically to two main fields, politics and religion. And he actually describes both politics and religion as discourses of risk and catastrophe. And it got me also thinking about vulnerability and precarity. Those terms don't appear there, don't appear in his text, but I think that in many ways they are obviously certainly related. To that, we need to actually add his very keen and very acute, I would say, reflection on the, for him, clear-cut distinction between fantasy and imagination. Again, taking his cue here from Immanuel Kant's productive imagination. And in a way, we have also referred to this previously. Fantasy would be then understood as an illusory construction, which tends to, escapism, and is based on fear and passivity. notion of passivity, sorry, is also obviously also intimately linked to indifference to conformity in many ways, and to non-participation, obviously. On the other hand, obviously, we have an exaltation of imagination, because imagination is coded or decoded as creative and active constructions of social reality. That's where the creativity part obviously comes in too, and therefore to practices of resistance and hope. Very different constructs here, obviously. I would say, obviously, the fantasy is really involved within the framework of the culture of fear and the culture of despair, while imagination would obviously be more understood in the realm of hope. And of course, therefore, while fantasy depolitizes, there's no public political participation that can emerge from fantasy, right? And actually social engagement becomes a very, how would I put this? A very convenient commodity in many ways. Oh, no, I'm actively involved. Well, no, of course not. But, you know, it looks nice, right? It sounds nice. We tend to praise that in many people, but also in organizations, in political parties, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to get into examples right now. So while, as I said, fantasy drives us to non-participation and no social engagement, imagination repolitizes our endeavor as human beings, as it means a call for popular participation and a meaningful, and here I'm being redundant, but I think it's that, of social engagement and commitment. I mean, people who believe in hope, who believe in imagination, need to be politically, and that's obviously the other thing too, politically committed very clearly. In the later part of this introduction, he delves in more profoundly into the so-called political discourse and theological discourse. He says that there are, certain common elements, common features, that both of them actually represent imaginations of the future, and also as a response, as a counter-attack in many ways to discourses of risk, uncertainty, and anxiety, as I was saying before, but clearly showcasing, actually, I would say, even even the scenario for the tension between now and what is to come. And therefore, both of them finally urge us to practices of hope. The differences are also, I think, quite clear in the text. Obviously, political discourse is based, it's grounded on acts of projection and anticipation for what is to come, and it's immanent. It's more, it's a very short period of time. Political ambitions need to be addressed and need to be solved between many inverted commas, but they need to be addressed, obviously, by the political parties and our political representatives. And here again, the notion of progress emerges clearly. And that's the one problematic areas, I would say, from the very beginning, not only for political discourse, but also for political discourse. Because if we believe only in a linear concept of progress, obviously we tend to forget many other knowledges and many other categories that integrate those knowledges that need to be also need to be alluded to, because they enrich our understanding of the political discourse to start with, and many other discourses. Now, as far as the theological discourse is concerned, there is a clear focus here on Judeo-Christian tradition that obviously I'm going to problematize too, and eschatology. Clearly the author is also very, I would say, inspired even by the Western apocalyptic tradition. But of course, how do you combine, right, apocalypse or the Western apocalyptic tradition to other notions of hope and hope for the future? So there's something there that we may want to discuss later on, if you want. And of course, also signaling the important long-lasting influence of quasi-theological concepts. So, you know, this is part of the discourse. Remember that he is a professor of religious theology and religious studies, so obviously this is very dear to him. And the very, you know, structure of the book, I think, already it tells us what his main aims and intentions are behind the writing of this book. I'm not going to read everything, but just for you to remember some key terms for the later reading and interpretation of his book. The part one would be obviously on the politics of fantasy. And here I would like to emphasize the second point, the fear manipulated through government, propaganda, and everyday anxiety. Don't you all feel like this? Don't you feel like, not only recently, but in general, manipulated by this fear that is installed in where we are immersed as a society? And of course, the ensuing question, desiring a culture of fear, really? Of course, many, and not only individuals, political parties, organizations, governments, etc., desire a culture of fear to, in fact, respond to this crisis of capitalism and the end of history. Wow, we don't name names here right now, but of course you may think about a few ones, right? That we watch and we listen to in these months, in these years. Part two, politics of imagination. Here you have some very important names. I'm not going to refer to them all, but especially for us, I guess, the utopian imagination by Bloch already, but also by Castoriadis and Ricoeur are also important references for our work on hope and practices of hope. And last but not least, I'm really thrilled to talk about the last part, experiments in hope, because it's all of these, you know, all these abstract notions are materialized in contemporary responses to a politics of fear. Political art and street theater, of course. We are very moved by that in recent times, also by mobilization and global protest movements that we are certainly seeing more of in recent times, and of course, always the body. We cannot forget the body. And of course, he talks about uses of the body in non-violent direct action, but I would say uses of the individual, but also to the collective body. That is also, I think, a very relevant part of what, the kind of work, the critical work we undertake here. Closing remarks. Okay, What I value more about Skrimshire's approach is obviously his interdisciplinary focus. I'm convinced, I'm personally convinced, but also as a professionally convinced, that the only way we can actually move forward in cultural studies, critical theory, just name it, is through an interdisciplinary approach. And also to be able to counter, in a way, all this, culture of despair, culture of fear, through practices of hope, which actually give life and meaning, not only, he says that, but not only to philosophical, theological tradition. We are here, I think, trying, in fact, probably joining Skrimshire's concerns, but also other critics' concerns about the fact that we need to map a logic or a rationale for hope in these quite strange times that we are living. And last but not least, I would emphasize the diverse nature of experiments in hope. As you know, diversity has become one of these absolutely erased and very controversial notions, but I think that we need to actually claim it. Diversity is part of how we can deal with these experiments, but also with working definitions of hope. So this is all for me. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mar, for your wonderful presentation. Very thoughtful presentation in which you've been tapping on a very personal reading of Skrimshire. And this is what makes this seminar series so interesting, I think, that each of us somehow position in relation to the texts. And this is what makes them so interesting. In the end, it's our relationship to the text and how we digest it or start a dialogue with it. A productive dialogue, indeed. So thank you, actually, thank you. So I've got so many ideas and so many things in my mind, but as we said, we were going to be asking questions at the end. So if Silvia is ready, we can now proceed with Silvia's presentation. Her mic is off. Let me see if she, can you turn your mic on? Yeah, it's already on.
Yes, it's ready.
Silvia?
I think so. You can hear me well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay.
And
So
what I'm going to do is to convert you into a presenter so that I can make sure that you can share your screen.
All right.
And now you should be able to share your screen.
And see, I can get to the bottom of this.
Okay, now you're fantastic. There you are.
Right. Okay. Excellent.
Yes.
All right.
Fantastic.
So thank you very much, Mark, for this very thoughtful and thought-provoking interpretation of the text that we have read. My presentation is going to be focusing on introducing some of the ideas brought forward by philosopher Ken Wilber, and what he aims at and hopes for by through his creation of the integral theory of consciousness. Let me talk a little bit about Ken himself, here you have a picture of him. Ken Wilber is a preeminent scholar of the integral stage of human development. He currently lives in Denver, Colorado, and he's an internationally known leader, founder in the year 2000 of the Integral Institute, and co-founder of Integral Life in 2007, a social media hub dedicated to sharing the integral vision with the worldwide community, as well as documenting and catalyzing the progress of the integral movement. Let's try to talk a little bit about this proposition that he has, and what might be the connections between the integral theory of consciousness that he proposes and any interpretation of hope, which is, of course, our main topic, the main topic of the seminars. What makes Ken Wilber's proposal relevant in today's world is that he put together a comprehensive or integrative philosophy incorporating cultural studies, anthropology, system theory, developmental psychology, biology, spirituality, and all these applied in fields as diverse as ecology, sustainability, psychotherapy, psychiatry, education, business, medicine, politics, and sports, and of course, the arts. The integral approach is the coherent organization, coordination, and harmonization of all the relevant practices, methodologies, and experiences available to human beings. So as you see, it's a quite ambitious project that he has in his hand. I would like to proceed with a quote by him, where he said, "You can't honor various methods and fields without showing how they fit together." And I think this links very much with the one of the thoughts that Mar brought together at the end of her talk. That is how to make a genuine world philosophy. So the interconnection, interdependence of fields through a cohesive, integrative methodology. Here you have some examples of his publications. He is a prolific writer. He wrote more than 30 books. He also contributed to media. And it was even a movie made of his life. The first volume that I wanted you to know about or of is The Spectrum of Consciousness that he published in 1977. As you see, he's been active for quite a bit. Here he provides his synthesis of religion, philosophy, physics, and psychology, starting a revolution in what has been known after the publication of this book as the branch of psychology known as transpersonal psychology. So it could be said that he was the creator of this branch of psychology, and that in fact is very, very much part of the psychological practice of psychologists today, clinical psychologists. He was the first to suggest a systematic way to the great philosophical systems of the West, and how could they be integrated with the contemplative traditions of the East. The second volume, dating from publication in 1980, was called The Atman Project, a transpersonal view of human development. And here he traces human development from infancy into adulthood, with all the stages that we go through as we get older and we live in the world. And the next volume is entitled The Four Quadrants, published in 1995. And here he introduced what we are going to see today, which is the All Quadrants, All Levels model that he further have expanded into his integral theory that we will be learning about in a bit. The next book is Quantum Questions, Mystical Writings of the World's Great Physicists. Notice the title, published in 2001. And he explores here the intersection between modern physics and mysticism through the reflection of pioneering scientists like Einstein, Heisenberg, and Schrödinger. And the book looks into the philosophical implications of scientific discovery, revealing a shared realization. While physics illuminates the material world, it cannot capture the essence of reality, which remains a domain of mystical experience. The next volume dates from 2001, is entitled Eye to Eye, The Quest for the New Paradigm. And here he examines what he calls the three realms of knowledge: the empirical realm of the senses, the rational realm of the mind, and the contemplative realm of the spirit. In the next volume, published also in 2001, entitled Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, the Spirit of Evolution, he traces the course of evolution from matter to mind and describes the common patterns that evolution takes in the different domains in which humanity expresses itself. This volume is very interesting because he focuses on modernity and postmodernity, what these movements mean and how they impact gender issues, psychotherapy, ecological concerns, and various liberation movements, and how the modern and postmodern world conceive of a spirit. The next two volumes are quite recent, just from last year. The first one is entitled Finding Radical Wholeness, The Integral Path to Unity, Growth, and Delight. And here he integrates the wisdom of spirituality, psychology, shadow work, very important, science, and integral theory to offer us a path to a radical and complete wholeness of what he calls waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. Wilber shows readers how to apply the integral theory to our everyday lives, aiming at transformation. And the last one, A Post-Truth World, is based on a criticism to the politics exerted by Donald Trump in contemporary America, politics, polarization, and a vision for transcending the chaos, from last year to 2021. Wilber, in his cartography of consciousness, known as the integral model, establishes a four-quadrant model that accounts for 4 dimensions of consciousness, being these intentional, behavioral, cultural, and social. The 4 quadrants combine with a dozen major levels or stages. Besides these, Wilber's integral model establishes 6 structures of consciousness discovered by Western psychology through scientific research methods. These structures of consciousness are called archaic, magic, mythic, pluralistic, and finally integral. And this is what interests me a lot about the connections between Wilber and studies in hope. And is Wilber's interest in promoting humans' potential, humans' transformation. He believes that humans can be more than what our bodies show. Because this human potential, as he puts it, is composed of spiritual growth, psychological growth, and social growth. His model calls for critical keys to account for human growth based on the world's great traditions and schools of consciousness theory and research to create an all-inclusive or integral map that included the best elements from each of these schools of consciousness and each of the world's great traditions. His search aims at drawing a comprehensive map of human potentials using all known systems and models of human growth, from the ancient shamans to today's breakthroughs in cognitive science, distilling their major components into 5 simple factors that are the keys to unlocking and facilitating human evolution, according to Wilber. They are, and you have it on the slide here, states, levels or stages, lines, and types. All of them are available in awareness. They are aspects of experience and contours of consciousness. The integral operating system is an info network that facilitates cross-disciplinary and transdisciplinary knowledge, and that is organized in 4 major classes that we're about to see in a minute. The 4 quadrants, which is a simple summary of the data that he has collected throughout the years. He makes emphasis on his writings that this summary represents a posteriori conclusion, not a priori assumption. Let's see a little bit of this all-quadrant, all-level approach, what he called the AQAL model, AQAL. Here you have it. The upper right quadrant is perhaps the most familiar, if you notice. It is a standard hierarchy presented by modern evolutionary science, atoms to molecules to cells to organisms, each of which transcends but includes its predecessor in an irreversible fashion. Cells contain molecules, but not vice versa. Molecules contain atoms, but not vice versa. And the not vice versa constitutes the irreversible hierarchy of time's evolutionary arrow. Each of these individual units are called holon. And a holon is a whole that is simultaneously part of some other whole. Wilber makes the observation that while individual holons generally get bigger, the collective usually gets smaller. The reason being that as an individual holon gets more complex, the number of holons that can reach that depth become less and less, and thus the collective becomes. Also points out that every exterior has an interior. The upper half of figure 1 refers to the individual holons, the lower half to their collective forms. The right half refers to the exterior or objective aspects of holons, and the left half to the interior or subjective forms. This gives us a grid of exterior individual or behavioral, interior individual or intentional, exterior collective or social, and interior collective or cultural. A grid of subjective, objective, intersubjective, and interobjective reality. Each of the quadrants, you probably have noticed, because he uses it in this way in the article, is described in a different type of language. The upper left is described in I language. The lower left is described in we language. The 2 right-hand quadrants, since they're both objective, are described in it language. These are essentially Sir Karl Popper's 3 worlds, subjective, cultural, and objective, Plato's the good, the true, and the beautiful, and Habermas' pre-validity claim, subjective truthfulness or of I, cultural justness of we, and objective truth of it. Each of the quadrants has a different type of truth or validity claim, different types of knowledge with different types of evidence and their validation procedures. The validity criterion here is not just truth, but truthfulness, or sincerity. That is, what all authentic knowledge claims have in common. So he makes his point that truth, being truth, behaving with truth, researching with truth is really important. Each Holland seems to have at least 4 facets: intentional, behavioral, cultural, and social, each of which is accessed by a different type of truth or validity claim. And all of those 4 validity claims follow the 3 strands of valid knowledge acquisition: injection, apprehension, and confirmation or rejection. Several of the existing theories of consciousness are predicated on the fact that consciousness evolution seems to show evidence of higher or post-formal stages of growth. There appear to be, in other words, several higher stages in the upper left quadrant. The School of Transpersonal Psychology has begun to investigate these higher states and stages. Substantial cross-cultural evidence already suggests that there are at least 4 broad stages of post-formal consciousness development. That is, development that goes beyond but includes the formal operational level: the psychic, the subtle, the causal, and the non-dual. The point is simply that there now exists a substantial amount, or rather compelling evidence, that interior consciousness can continue the evolutionary process of transcending and include, so that even rationality itself is transcended and included in post-formal stages of awareness, stages that increasingly take on characteristics that might best be described as spiritual or mystical. But this is a mysticism grounding genuine experience. With reference to the upper left quadrant, if we add these 4 higher and post-formal stages to the standard stages given in figure 1, we arrive at the great chain of being that you have on the screen now, as given by perhaps its 2 more gifted exponents, Plotinus and Sri Aurobindo, showing the stunning similarity of the great chain wherever it appeared, east or west, north or south, composing a truly multicultural map. The interior dimensions of the human being seem to be composed of a spectrum of consciousness, running from sensation to perception to impulse, to image, to symbol, to concept, to rule, to formal, to vision logic, to psychic, to subtle, to causal, to non-dual state. In simplified form, this spectrum appears to range from subconscious to self-conscious to superconscious, from personal to transpersonal, from instinctual to mental to spiritual, from pre-formal to post-formal, from instinct to ego to God. Now that it is simply another way to say that each of the quadrants consists of several different levels or dimensions, as we have already seen in figure 1. So we arrive to the main question that remains, and that is, what is consciousness? Let's see if Wilber can enlighten us into this very difficult and very present question, even in science today. It appears that consciousness actually exists distributed across all 4 quadrants with all their various levels and dimensions. We've seen that already. The first step towards a genuine theory of consciousness is the realization that consciousness, maybe it's going to sound a little bit weird, but this is what scientific research is showing us nowadays. Consciousness is not located in the organism. Rather, it's a four-quadrant affair, and if it exists at all, is distributed across the four quadrants, and it's anchored equally on each one of them. Neither consciousness, personality, individual agency, nor psychopathology can be located simply or solely in the individual organism. The subjective domain is always already embedded in intersubjective, objective, and interobjective realities, all of which are partly constitutive of subjective agency and subsequent pathologies. It is quite true that consciousness is anchored in the physical brain, but consciousness is also and equally anchored in interior intentionality, an intentionality that cannot be explained in physicalist or empiricist terms, nor disclosed by their methods or their validity claims. We have not invented a machine yet that covers this research. Neither can consciousness be finally located in the individual, because consciousness is also fully anchored in cultural meaning. So there is no individual consciousness, and we can discuss how Carl Jung and his unconscious, collective unconscious really falls into place here. You cannot generate meaning in a vacuum, nor can you generate it with a physical brain alone, but only in an intersubjective circle of mutual recognition. Physical brains raised in the wild, and we have examples of wolf boys, generate neither personal autonomy nor linguistic competence, from which it plainly follows the physical brain per se is not the autonomous seat of consciousness, as it was defended by science up to the 20th century. In short, consciousness is not located merely in the physical brain, nor in the physical organism, nor in the ecological system, nor in the cultural context, nor does it emerge from any of these domains. Rather, it is anchored in and distributed across all of those domains with all of their available levels. Consciousness is distributed not just in a spaces of extension, but in a spaces of intention. It is not located inside the brain nor outside the brain either, because both of these are physical boundaries with simple location, and yet a good part of consciousness exists not merely in physical space, but in emotional spaces, mental spaces, spiritual spaces, none of which have simple location, and yet all of which are very real to us. So he proposes a methodology, taking all this into consideration, for the integral study of consciousness. This methodology would apparently need to include two broad wings. The first is the simultaneous tracking of the various levels and lines in each of the quadrants, and then noting their correlations, each to all the others, and in no way trying to reduce any to the others. And the second, and this is going to be startling, I think, to all of us, is the interior transformation of the researchers themselves. He contends that this transformation is absolutely unavoidable, an unavoidable part of the paradigm of an integral approach to consciousness. So these two wings, the non-reductionistic thermal tracking of all quadrants and the transformation of researchers themselves are both necessary in order to approach an integral understanding of consciousness. Reaching up to conclusions here. The integral approach to consciousness might include the following agenda. 1, to continue research on the various particular approaches, that is, continue to refine our understanding of the many pieces of the puzzle of consciousness. 2, confront the simple fact that in some cases, a change in consciousness on the part of researchers themselves is mandatory for the investigation of consciousness itself. 3, the quadrants and levels are in some sense quite different, but they are different aspects of the cosmos, which means that they are also intrinsically touching each other in very profound ways. Let us notice that the ways in which they touch and attempt theoretically to elucidate this wonderfully rich and interwoven tapestry. And for an all-quadrant, all-level approach holds the only chance, according to Wilber, of an authentic and integral theory of consciousness, if such indeed exists. So here are some questions for debate. This is all my presentation on the topic. These questions that you see in the screen are on the part of my colleague's presentation, Dr. Gallego. And then here you have some questions related to my participation. So we both, Dr. Gallego and me, are hoping that they will generate productive debate and an exchange of ideas. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Silvia. It was amazing listening to you. And even though I had read the article, listening to you explaining it made me come up with new connections that I hadn't noticed before. So thank you very much for a very illuminating presentation. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I would like to go back, if that is possible, to your questions, because I would love to hear you, if possible. Don't worry, don't worry.
I stopped sharing. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Maybe Mar would like to read and maybe comment on the questions that she had prepared. And maybe you can also read the questions and comment on them a little bit so that we can approach the questions from your own perspective and then see if we can contribute to the questions in some way. So these questions belong to Mar's presentation.
Sorry.
Mar, maybe she wants to read them and comment on them, or just simply read them. I don't know.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I have sort of mentioned some of my concerns or traveled spots, I guess, in when dealing with the theory itself, with Skrimshire's paradigm. And we may sparkle an interesting debate about them or throughout them, or other questions that may also obviously come up from you. For me, the first one, and actually I think I posted throughout my talk, is this notion of why, is it necessary? Because we have seen this also in the previous seminar in some distinct ways, but in some ways too. Why is it necessary then to approach hope, based or predicated on the Judeo-Christian tradition? I would stop there and see if anyone would like to comment on this. although I cannot see you at all. I don't know what I did here, but I don't see you anymore. Should I read the three questions and then we will start the debate?
Yeah, possibly you can read the 3 questions,
Okay.
and then out of the 6 questions, maybe we can come up with comments.
Okay.
Because otherwise you won't be able to see us, and it will be like a bit not having the chance of looking at each other's faces.
And interact with each other, of course.
That's it.
No. Well, one is why, as I was saying, why is hope predicated on the Judeo-Christian tradition? Can we find other productive ways, really, of thinking about hope without or apart from the Judeo-Christian tradition? Second one, I also mentioned in my talk, the problematic use for me of the linear concept of progress, because if we, if we think about other knowledges, as I was pointing out at the end of the talk, other knowledges that have been considered by obviously the powers that be as discredited knowledges, but are obviously very enriching and absolutely fundamental knowledges. They are not necessarily grounded in a concept of, especially in the linear concept of progress. And by the way, I would even add, not on the linear concept of time. So that's one other idea. And of course, last but not least, what about love and community? This was, recurrent as I was reading this work. So I hope it is clear. Let me just...
It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I don't know why I cannot move from here now. Let me see, because it's not.
Press escape.
There we go. I would say.
And then you will be able to
exactly
see us again.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm still sharing it.
No, you're not, because the person sharing is Silvia.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
And Silvia, maybe you want to comment on your questions
Right.
before.
These are the questions that I sort of prepared. Since consciousness attaches all of us as part of our experience as human beings, what aspects, if any, of the integral model would you identify with? The second question has to do with finding coincidences in the approaches of Skrimshire and Wilber. And the third one is, how does Wilber's model find its realization through love? And in this, I connect with Mar's concerns regarding this absolutely powerful, energetic field that we all have within us, that we are, in fact. But obviously, I don't know how many of us know about it. We can discuss that. That's it.
Thank you so much. I was writing down questions. Well, I would like to actually mute my mic and leave the floor to anyone who wants to answer questions or comment on any of these ideas that you were very beautifully and very brightly sharing with us.
So could you, Silvia, stop sharing the screen so we can actually see faces, people? Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Benjamin Carrascal raised his hand, maybe.
Yeah, here I am.
Yeah, fantastic.
Hi.
We can't see you very well, but
you can see me well. My mic is not very good. Sorry.
It's a connection, but we can hear you great.
Yeah, there's a big thunderstorm here in my hometown, So that probably may be difficult. So I don't know if this is a, how to say, appropriate comment to do for this seminar. But currently I am writing, okay, I'm working on it, on my PhD, and it's about comic books. I'm a massive nerd, as you can see by the background. And yeah, I have no shame in it. What's my shirt today? Of course, it's also nerdy things. Okay, so one interesting thing that Mar said about one interesting question was the idea of the Judeo-Christian values for hope, right? How hope is attached to Judeo-Christian values, and I couldn't stop thinking about Superman. And the reason I think about him is because Superman is very integral to the idea of the monomyth, the American monomyth, which, and I'm quoting here, I'm going to read from what I have written so far, is that the American monolith, was written by Lang and Trimble for the man, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, an examination of the American monomyth and the comic book superhero. I quote, "The American monomyth secularized Judeo-Christian ideals by combining the selfless individual who sacrifices himself for others and the zealous crusaders who destroys evil. The super saviors replaced the Christ figure whose credibility has been eroded by scientific rationalism, but at the same time reflect a hope of divinity and redemption that science has never been able to eradicate." It's just something that I thought about, how even though we separate fiction or hope from Christ, from all those values, we have them so integrated in our way of thinking that we will always go back to them. But that's not the only one thing that I wanted to talk about relating to hope, superheroes, and so on. It's about another thing that was said about superheroes, and it was about from Umberto Eco. And I don't think I have the quote with me here right now, but what he said eventually practically comes down to that superhero fiction is essentially about hope, right? About how we can overcome our problems, how we can look up to someone, or we have to better ourselves. But he also said that inherently, due to the nature of the publishing houses, and this goes to the ideas of capitalism and all that, the superhero itself, even though in a narrative sense should strive to better society, ultimately just goes to circles around status quo, right? It goes back, he doesn't fix a problem, he fixes something that is threatening a change, a good or bad change. And that's something that really came down when Mar talked about sorry, I have it here written down, the fear, the how they want us afraid. And I just thought about how even though we have figures of hope, the media that uses those figures of hope doesn't seem to want us to escape. It always default of bad actors, right? When we all have histories of, oh, the bad businessman, he's bad, he's the bad businessman, but there's good businessman, right? There's the good capitalism and there's bad capitalism, and we are good capitalists because everyone can be rich, everyone can work for themselves. And that's just something that I was thinking about as you were speaking more. It's not a question per se, but it's just something that I wanted to share with you, so that because my sister is very tired of me talking about to her about these things, as she's my only victim here. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you so much, Benjamin. I actually, I really thank you, because I think it is very promising. Should I say this? Because I've been I have started for a while working on science fiction, especially for young adults, and things that you were saying in a way resonate, with that. Okay, let me start from, let's say, from the question I posed, and then we can continue. One thing that I find relevant is what you were saying about Superman. I mean, about the myths in general. I think that the question is really that we human beings, in general, cultures, etc., we need some kind of transcendence, and this would tie up to what Silvia was also telling us about. So there is some when science, literally substituted, right? All these big narratives of divinity, and as you were saying, the religious values, I do think that they were not eliminated; they were transformed, and all the you were talking about secularization of these beliefs, and it's true, it's secularization, but I mean, it's clear process of secularization and transformation, but at the same time, I think it is in a way creating another divine hierarchy, especially with superheroes. I was thinking, you just got me thinking about Black Panther movies. I don't know if you have seen them, and the way
I'm super nerdy of comic books, but I don't like superhero movies. It's a self-contradiction. Like,
it is.
I adore superheroes, but I cannot stand them. I just see them as, this is unfair because I spend a lot of time talking about how comics are made by people instead of just a big corporation. But
Right.
those movies for me are just like cash cows, right? There's just to milk to get money. Yes, but I understand your point. Yeah.
I mean, actually, Black Panther movies, especially the first one, is actually based on a comic strip. I hope you do know this. Okay,
Yes.
so I think it is in a way related. But what I'm trying to say is that we human beings need, I think, really to go beyond our physical realm. And that's why I think science fiction and superheroes and all of that are so significant, even in current times. When you think about how in times of crisis, because we do teach this in class, in times of crisis, we get this revival of first science fiction, but also all the monster narratives, the invasion movies, all of that. I think it's part of this really human need to respond to fear. I'm being simplistic here, I have to admit, but it's part of that. It's part of how we create other hierarchies, but because we understand, that we need some kind of even with writers, we do this a lot. It's like the intellectuals and writers are another. I was going to say species, but they're a different kind of elite, that they are, above the rest of us. But I think it's part of that, and if you allow me, I think it has to do with our notions of hope, because we need to hope, to start with, for a better future, right? And for better ways or better forms of life. And science fiction responds to that very nicely, I think. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think it's part of this.
Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Actually.
Thank you.
Yeah. My work is not more about hope. It's not about hope. It's more about how the characters have evolved to reflect, specifically what you said, certain moments in history, sort of like how today is I wonder why it's more frowned upon to look up to billionaires, right? Today is the figure of the benevolent billionaire is very tough to sell to audiences, because we have very good examples of how those people work and the real interest of those people compared to the same narratives, for example, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even, how we all thought that, oh yeah, they're technocrats, they are good for us, they help people. And how we change, how fiction reflected on the comic reflect those changes in reality, in the perception of the audience, of the public, of the authors, etc. So yeah, very good. Glad to talk. Yes.
Thank you very much, because it's many people are responding to this. I hope I got the order right. I think that Patricia Garcia raised her hand.
If you allow me to interrupt,
please,
and maybe to suggest that Maria Borras, her field of expertise is in graphic novels, and she already posted in the chat. And even though she didn't raise her hand,
but she did.
the next person, maybe she wants to add something, because it is just related to the topic, and then we can go to these other people who wanted to say something. I'm just saying this because she's an expert in graphic novels, so.
Well, expert is always a big word, but it's what I'm actually working on and teaching and trying to learn more, because it's a vast field, and superheroes is not my area of expertise at all. Not because I don't like superheroes, but because it's not where, I don't know, it's not, probably I didn't enter, my comics didn't enter my life through superheroes, and I wasn't always an active reader, and therefore when I started reading comics was more from I was looking for long formats, not really serials like superheroes, but that's something that has to do with my background. And just to say that I don't have anything against superheroes, because I always raise yes, it's a concern that we also have within comics scholarships. Is, oh no, she is not into superheroes, so her opinion on superheroes is not valid. But what I know is that superheroes were inaugurated with Superman, as Benjamin was saying. The year is 1936, and the creators were two Jewish authors, Siegel and Schuster. And the fact is that possibly they were rejected because they didn't want to create comic books. Comic books in themselves existed, but they were not too popular. And they wanted to present their superhero in newspapers, which was the format in which comics were usually read, through newspapers and Sunday pages in newspapers. And probably they were rejected because they were Jewish. So they were creating Superman in the 30s, in 1936. So it's a year in which the persecution of Jewish in Europe had already started, and in fact, many people see many utopian considerations regarding the creation of Superman, which is the first superhero. So there is this utopian potential in the creation of superheroes since the very beginning, possibly through this myth of a man who is so strong that no one can actually destroy him. So it's also a metaphor of resilience in itself. And is of course, it inaugurates a monomyth, is an American myth, as you have very well said as well. But at the same time, I think, and I was just looking at my quotes because I wanted to say many things. science in superheroes doesn't start with Superman. It starts a bit later with the introduction of the Silver Age superheroes, where science is going to be more prevalent. So what we have is like the mythic, fantastic dimension of superheroes together with a more science-oriented direction of superheroes, and which is a whole mythological compendium, but doesn't allow for much creativity, because comic books and superheroes is the biggest example. So superheroes are an industry, and they were always an industry since Schlegel and Shuster invented Superman and started to have success, immediate success with Superman, and it started with his own comic books. So I think it's this duality, science, fantasy, or myth fantasy or myth science, works well with what Mar was explaining so wonderfully about our author and the distinction between fantasy and imagination, because I think superheroes in many ways represent this culture of fear, this culture of despair that we find in many, well, in the speculative genre, but specifically in the fantasy stories, in fantasy tales, in fantasy oriented fiction. And whereas the imagination, which is the culture of hope, is much more oriented towards sci-fi and towards, well, this perhaps linear idea of progress that I want to escape as well, but it's difficult to. I don't know how to. Yes, introducing, I don't know, alternative temporalities, which sci-fi is precisely very open to alternative temporalities, to alternative, let's say, time paradigms. So it's very rich in that sense. So I think it's precisely what Mar was commenting on Skrimshire distinction between fantasy and imagination. For me, it totally rings the bell in the distinction between speculative fiction, fantasy on the one hand, sci-fi on another. And for me, there's no hope in fantasy. There was never hope in fantasy. It was just escapism, even though Tolkien wouldn't agree with me. And I think superheroes are super interesting, but because they somehow manage to juggle both things together. And they can be super evocative as examples. And I think Mar was very apt in introducing Black Panther as an example, because it was a massive phenomenon among Black readers and among Black spectators through films, but also, especially through films, yes, but also through the comic books, which were recovered and had their special issues, because it was, as you know, a superhero that appeared in the 60s, but it was later recovered in the last decade. So it's, I think they can be very evocative metaphors, but at the same time, they can be absolutely, as you have seen, kind of glorifying technocrats and glorifying this culture of fear that Mar was speaking about. So it's a very interesting, I think, mixture, because there's a bit of everything. And I think there's a bit of everything precisely because it's an industry. So creators have a limited action and have limited capabilities to go and experiment there. And if we want to read alternative, perhaps, readings, more disruptive readings, we kind of look for industry. We have to look outside industry, because within industry, we are only going to see fractures here and there. And that's disappointing sometimes as readers, that you have to, you know, look for the gap. But outside the industry, outside the mainstream, there is always more, I don't know, ground for research that can be more, you know, revolutionary or thought-provoking or whatever. Sorry, I had to jump in to the...
No, thank you so much, Maria, for your very suggestive and knowledgeable comments. Actually, you know, while I agree completely with what you have said about fantasy as not being, you know, what Skrimshire says that, right? Fantasy holds no hope. I was actually recalling Namina Forna's I don't remember the title or not, but I wrote an article very recently about it. Ramira Forna's young adult fiction. And there's at the end of the first book, because it's a trilogy, and I don't remember the first. I have my book here, but I'm not going to get it. But anyway, at the end of the first book, she actually states the opposite. And it's very interesting because what she's saying basically is that the Gilded Ones, exactly, the Gilded Ones, that is the first one in the trilogy. And in as I said, I think it's at the introduction or at the end, I think it is. She states that basically she needed to write a book, and because she wanted to give hope to young adults, especially young women, in that they could transform. I mean, she talks a lot about gender violence, for example, and how they could be active agents in transforming that terrible situation. No, so yes, but it's no, it's a contradictory if you think about it. You know, and I would say I actually love the book. Because of that, because of despite the dark and very horrifying practices of this, it's an army of women, impure women, they're called, so mind you, despite all that, Alaki they are called, despite all that, there is hope in the book, and especially at the end, and in the restoration of matriarchal. Okay, no spoiler, but in the restoration of matriarchal, or the matriarchal line. So I will stop there. But we need to think about this, you know, because yes, I completely agree with you, and of course with the clear-cut distinction in Skrimshire's terms, but at the same time, I wonder, I wonder. So I don't know, Maria, you want to add anything? No? Should I move then to, I think it was Patricia Garcia, please?
And then Francisco.
Right.
And after Francisco, Teresa Garcia.
But, okay.
Sorry, Patricia, for having used my power to invite Maria to jump in, but you know, she's just an expert, and I thought that she would contribute to that particular topic in a more relevant way than any of us. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, now I am quite awkward because I'm not an expert, not on comic books, not on hope either, but I'm really enjoying this seminar series, I have to tell you, and I also want to thank you for your wonderful contributions, because for me these theoretical texts are quite thick and you make me understand them much better. It's all much clearer after listening to your insights. Well, while I was reading the text, and much more when I was listening to you, and then with all those questions, I'm quite interested in the Judeo-Christian perspective of all of this, and also because I'm also working with some Judeo-Christian, not texts, but concepts. For example, the author Calinescu calls them time-honored narratives. And I think that maybe there are, and of course, I'm sure that there shall be other perspectives on hope other than those related to the Judeo-Christian culture. But it is true that I think that it is from Judeo-Christian culture where we can find maybe like the cornerstone or the origins of the cultural roots of hope in Western civilization, at least. And because I think that one of the main reasons for people to have faith is hope, because they have, as Mar was saying, for example, hope for a better future, and in the Christian case, for example, hope of an afterlife. So also the question of what about love and community made me think a lot, because for me and to my mind, communities are articulated around love in some way or another. And And this may be influenced maybe by my Christian background, because here in Cordoba, we all know that it's like I don't know, I was raised in a Christian school as well. And I truly believe in it. And I think that hope is like a necessary condition for love in some way. And also, with all these ideas, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite quotes from the book of Corinthians that maybe give you also food for thought in this topic, which is Corinthians 13, in which they talk about love and hope. And while the text is long, but you know that they are distributed in versicles. So I'm going to read you a couple of them. Corinthians 13 start with, if I speak the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or claiming cymbal. And it follows, and I think that the key is found at the very end, when it says, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So maybe this can give you some food for thought about the relationship between love, hope in the Judeo-Christian culture. And that was all. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia, for reminding us of this beautiful quote and what it means. I'm not I have to admit that I'm not problematizing this. Quite the opposite. I also come from a Christian background, okay, and for me, as you were saying, love, faith, but love and community are inseparable, obviously. What I was trying to, at least, to make us think is a bit, you know, further, I guess, into the connection between love. Okay, let me get this straight. The connection. I agree with you. You have said it very nicely. Hope is a necessary condition for love. Completely. To the point. But I think that what I am trying to problematize is that you know, other cultures, worldviews, and traditions and values are based on community and love, and they're not necessarily within the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's probably what I was trying to get at. Is it clear what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sure. And I completely agree.
Because I come, especially because I've been working on decolonial feminism for quite a long time now. And in decolonial feminism, you see all these knowledges that are rooted in a sense of community and communal love. So that is what I was just trying to raise our awareness of. That, of course, in Judeo-Christian tradition is clear, but in other traditions too. And for example, of course, I was trying to bring to the discussion, as I always do. I'm not going to be talking about Toni Morrison right now, but I will eventually. No. I was trying to bring to the discussion bell hooks insights about love, you know. And for me, she is literally, and of course, I'm using again a religious metaphor here, but she is a prophetess of love. You know, so that's especially. I have the book here, obviously, because I was going to show it. All about love. Can you see it? It's this book is really. I think it's a absolutely fundamental contribution if you want to know more about love and love ethics and community. I'm not going to read the quote I was going to now, because I think the discussion is going on. But let's think about that. Let's open a little bit our minds to understanding hope and love also in other cultural contexts. Probably that's what I was trying to point out. Okay.
Thank you.
And now I think it was Francisco, right? Francisco's turn. Francisco.
Yes.
Yes, it was Francisco.
Sorry, I think I cannot turn the camera
Okay.
at the moment. First of all, I would like to thank all of the presentations, Maria and Silvia, and also the participants of the discussion so far. I have to say that I first raised my hand because I agree with the statement of Benjamin that even if we try to push back or push away Christian values in Western civilization, it's really, really hard to get rid of them completely, because it's and also in line with Mar has said recently, even if we secularize Western society, we are always going to look for some messiah. I mean, in most of political doctrines, both of the left and right, or even the center, the values that are the driving force of these ideologies, social justice, for example, are even, we can even trace them back to Christian doctrine. For example, the concept of social justice, it comes to my mind the prophecy of Isaiah that says that the tiger will eat alongside the sheep, or all of this idea of the weakest members of society being praised, and in contrary to the ill fate of the strongest, the wealthiest. And also, I have to say that this topic interests me a lot, because indeed I am on the first year of my PhD, and I'm working on the concept of hope and how it's present in American and British Catholic authors. And indeed, I try to make it an interdisciplinary work between literary criticism and Catholic theology, because the Catholic authors being the authors chosen being Catholic, having a background on Catholic theology is very helpful in understanding them. And this is why this author we are discussing now is so helpful for me. So I want to thank Mar for introducing him to me. And also, it's interesting because thanks to this seminary, I've also discovered Han on the first session, which also has a background on Catholic theology. So I wanted to thank Cristina as well. Well, I have other things to say, but I don't want to spend too much time talking. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, and very happy, very delighted that it's is helping, is influencing and impacting your research. Yes, as I said before, it's not that I am not what is it, the word? I'm not rejecting Judeo-Christian tradition. I just would like us to think beyond the Judeo-Christian paradigms. That's probably coming from where I come. I especially work with, as I was saying previously, with decolonial feminism, but also with African and African American values and worldviews, and you can find all that there. So of course we cannot, I guess we could not, even if we wanted to, escape, our Judeo-Christian background, because it's part of our legacy and our cultural makeup. But at the same time, I think that we may value other traditions. And I was thinking about Maria talking about, for example, going back to Maria's remarks, about alternative temporalities. Well, that is precisely what happens in many of these worldviews and cultures. That the other, the problem, I think, is that we Westerners, I mean, from a Western point of view, we tend to associate success with progress, with the notion of progress in itself. But that is a Western concept, okay? But because what is progress is, it is quite different, depending on the cultural framework we are, we are dealing with. So that's what I wanted us to be alert to the possible other notions of progress, and especially to the idea that we always move forward, to something better. Really, in present day, in this present day world, not to be talking about America only, but are we actually really moving to a better, to a better depiction of the world, to a more humanitarian, a more ecological, a more just world? Are we? So think about that. So the notion of progress in itself, I think it is, we need to question it, really. It is debatable. But anyway, that was my thoughts on that. But thank you so much, Francisco, for your insightful comments too. And now we're moving, I think, to Teresa, right? Teresa?
Yes, and after Teresa, we've got Leonor and Macarena.
Okay, great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Matt and Silvia, for your wonderful contributions. I found this text really insightful, both of them, especially considering the connections between both. But before maybe commenting on this, I'd like to address again this idea of the Judeo-Christian tradition, because I felt that both Patricia and Francisco were trying to advocate for the usefulness of still using these concepts from this perspective when it comes to conceptualizing or theorizing about hope. And it's true that we have this emphasis on love and community. But I also think that as the concept of hope has expanded into the field of secular intellectualism, especially from the 20th century onwards, we can say it's embedded in this Judeo-Christian tradition, but maybe it's being commodified using certain aspects instead of others, because I feel that the conception of hope, it's been really individualistic. Because even if we have Christ as this redeeming figure trying to save the community, let's say, in the end, it's all about personal salvation, and it's hope in terms of individual progress. And I think it's here where other knowledges are really insightful in that sense. And hope it's also associated with this idea of human rationality and empiric and scientific methodologies. On the other hand, and as Mara, you were mentioning decolonial feminism, we have decolonial hope. This idea of integrating different knowledges, non-Western and non-hegemonic knowledges that may offer a different perception of progress and advancement. It's not very much related to success, but maybe to ideas of healing or recovery. And I think it's important to reclaim these systems of knowledge that had been oppressed for so long, and that can be actually really insightful when it comes to this idea of community and love from other perspective. And Maria mentioned when she was talking about Black Panther on the group chat, she mentioned Nnedi Okorafor, and I've been working on her. I read her novel Lagoon, and I think it's a perfect example of this idea of decolonial hope. The way she's appropriating apocalyptic rhetoric, but applied to other knowledges and systems of knowledge that are really insightful. This idea of alternative notions of time and progress, and how we can interact with the physical world, but also with this more spiritual dimension. And it's important in this sense to connect this idea with Wilber's conception of consciousness, this integral dimension, including other realms that are not usually thought of but it should be considered as well, this idea of spirituality. And yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Teresa, very much. Thank you for talking about the decolonial hope, obviously, which is very much part of what I was trying to also bring to the discussion in many ways. And but I don't know that work, Lagoon, so I'm going to check it out because I really need to read it, obviously, after what you have said. And thank you for defining so well decolonial hope in terms of healing and recovery. Because all those terms, healing and recovery, are collective, are communal. And that's where, we can, as I said, we can learn so much from those, different approaches to, coming from non-hegemonic knowledges. And I don't know if Silvia, because Teresa made a reference to Wilber, would you want to add something to that, Silvia?
I just I've been listening very attentively to what you guys are discussing, and definitely this idea of the possibilities of perception going beyond the material, and this idea of the transformative project of humanity. We want to endure and do something about what is happening. We need to put effort and work. It's not just going to happen overnight. And in order to do this, we need to be knowing who we are and the splendid, magnificent beings that we are. And all that is around us is telling us, oh, the opposite. Be scared. You don't have the power to change anything. But we don't want to change anyone. We need to change ourselves. When you change yourself, the rest around you changes. And this is, I think, bottom line when in the methodology Wilber says the person who approaches the integral theory needs to go under a transformation, definitely. And I have to say that what caused me to be interested in Wilber is going through that personal transformation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have maybe paid any attention or would have seen Wilber as a very complicated subject, which he is, because he's so such a magnificent being that he wants to speak for all, connect all, and base all in our efforts to look for love, connection, and healing more than anything else, because we've been in our society, we've been told that love is this and that, but really, love is nothing of what we have been taught at all. So we need to reconceptualize, as Mar was mentioning, reconceptualize the interior and the exterior, and question our perception and enhance our perception in order to learn basically about ourselves. And then we can go on and be productive in society in terms of contributing to society with something that is valuable and that helps the community. I don't know. I want to stop here because I want my colleagues, the rest, the ones who are there to participate.
Well, thank you, Silvia, for this very insightful response. And I guess it's Leonore's turn, right? Please.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank both Mara and Silvia for their profoundly insightful presentations. I've got more questions than answers. First of all, I'd like to praise the wonderful talk presented by our colleague Silvia. I was, amazed by this sophisticated, elegant construct compass. It's almost a compass to consciousness, but still don't know what consciousness is. I've got more questions than answers, as I said.
Yes.
Is consciousness an exclusively human attribute? You said it is a puzzle, and consciousness is a puzzle, at least it is to me. It's obvious that consciousness is omnipresent, it is ubiquitous, but is it a human prerogative? That's something I'd like to ask you. And then I have one more question for Mark. I'm not 100% clear about the connection between love and hope. It's a difficult connection. Patricia said hope is a necessary condition for love, but we could put it the other way around and say love is a necessary condition or a prerequisite for hope. What I do know for a fact is that hope is a profoundly human attribute, and so is love. Both of them seem to be activitas naturalis, that is to say, una apetencia natural, a natural inclination or a natural longing, and both of them are deeply rooted somewhere in our consciousness, in our bodies, in our minds. Certainly, they are inextricably linked to each other in our Western mindset. So my question for Marius, could you please expand on the connection between hope and love? I think it's possible to approach this connection from a perspective which has nothing whatsoever to do with the Judeo-Christian legacy or tradition. I think there are other places from which to approach this wonderful constellation of concepts, and I was wondering what your answer, what your take is on that. So more questions than answers, as you can see. But actually, it was Maria who raised her hand and wanted to contribute something. So maybe before you answer this question, sorry, maybe we could listen to what she has to say.
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, thank you to both of you, because it was not just all the interesting comments that you made were necessary, but also, I mean, essential to understand the core of these texts that were quite complex. And so my comment was in relation to the Judeo-Christian question again. But it was related to the fact that when we were discussing in the first seminar the concept of solicilia by Albrecht Planning, I think that here the Judeo-Christian perspective is not taken into account, and at the same time we can see how love and community are intertwined in order to refer to the bioregion, that is, to the place where these people, for example, communities or people who has lost recently their home place, well, they refer to this concept, and it is genuine love of their environment, and it's not related to that idea. In fact, I would like to share with you an author that is called Natalie Rice, that talks about this concept in relation to her bioregion that was lost because of a fire, human-induced, of course. And then also indigenous writer, Canadian writer that is called Shannon Jodrey. She wrote a play that is called El Aputier, and they also talk about this phenomena, this solicilia, but in relation to indigenous people losing their homeland, their place, because it was taken away from them. And again, I think the sense of community and love is involved there, but it is of course hope, because they want to recover this place and they are hopeful about that. But again, I don't think it is related to the Judeo-Christian perspective in that case. So I don't know if you agree, or do you have a different take on that? But I thought maybe that since it is not an Eurocentric and Western perspective, that is why it could be explained in that way.
Silvia, would you want to go first?
Right. Very briefly, I will answer Leonor's question. Thank you, Leonor. Very keen question. Traditionally, by science, consciousness has been connected to brain activity, and it has been connected to intelligence. But we learn today through a series of experiments. Some of them are things that people expose themselves to or go through because they want to learn about perception, and others are spontaneous. And I'm referring to the concept of regressions, right? We know that everything in the universe has consciousness. Minerals, plants. There is a lot of research, and I'm sure you know about it, about the intelligence, the consciousness of plants that have been developed within the last 10 years, you know. So the idea is that the self that we are beyond our materiality has a chance to learn every time it incarnates in life on Earth. And this is what, for example, Dolores Cannon, the psychotherapist, I don't know if you have heard from her. She has written many books on giving accounts on how consciousness is everywhere, because when people go through regressions through the experience, some of them are spontaneous. Okay, you don't need to be with a therapist. They recall being a piece of stone. They recall being plants. They recall being animals. They recall having all these experiences and learning from those experiences. You know? So this idea of memory actively engaged with consciousness needs to be explored. And nowadays, and I finish with this, science is getting into the matter because of the phenomenon of near-death experiences. So you have all these heart doctors who are bringing people back literally from death. And when they revive them, people come telling amazing stories about who they are, you know. And this has been sustained nowadays with extensive literature produced by scientists and doctors. And maybe you're familiar with the work of Raymond Moody or Brian Weiss or Pim van Lommel. All these are people that are researching what is consciousness beside the brain, you know. And yet, no, I don't have a specific readings. I'm drinking a Macarena because, well, I do have a specific readings. Yes, I have a couple of names that I could recommend. I will put them on the chat. But this is what I want you to realize is this is an ongoing learning experience through science and spirituality, joining hands, you know. And this is happening now when all these two approaches to humanity were separate. But now, thanks to science, they are coming together. So we have a broader idea of who we are, you know, and definitely has nothing to do with just this body and just this. And this is why many of the therapists and people that talk about transformation in life write about the importance of being in the present moment, the non-duality. There you're able to perceive and connect with everything as if it is part of you. And I think it goes very well with what Wilber was saying. I'll stop there. Thank you. And sometimes this is like crazy talk, but nowadays it's backed up by science. So it's not crazy talk anymore. It's not science fiction. This is us, humanity. And for me, this creates a pathway of hope immensely. But very important, you need to be willing to learn, willing to take the trip. And in the kind of society where we are, as you have very well commented, keeping us in fear, in limitation, in precarity, in vulnerability, is what we have around every day. So you have to make the effort to go away from that in order to find yourself. I leave it there.
Okay. I don't know if I can answer you, Leonor, because I mean, what comes first? What is a condition of? No, I don't think they are I mean, it's like inherently intertwined, love and hope, and yes, faith and community. So I wouldn't dare to say what comes first. What I think it is very evident, and this relates to Maria's telling us about indigenous people's knowledges, is that they are part of the same thing, you know. And I learned it of course in the Christian church, but then I really learned it through Native Americans mythologies. And what I think is interesting is that I think as you know what I think really, I mean, this may sound terrible, but what I really think is that we are in such a huge crisis right now that we need to turn to Jesus, it sounds terrible that I say this, you know, but it's like we need to turn to other cultures that are healing cultures. We forgot about that. And in Native Americans, indigenous peoples, also in many African and African American cultures, there is a holistic conception of the self and a holistic conception of the community. The individual, remember, cannot be cured individually. You cannot only heal, as Silvia was also saying, you cannot only heal the physical part of the physical aspect, because everything is interrelated and interdependent. In the end, of course, we go back to interdependence, but it's true. And I think that the problem with the huge crisis right now is that in many ways, you know, I compare it to what happened after the First World War and after the Second World War in many ways, no? This idea of the lost generation, think about that. Think about, I mean, of course, we could not even dare to say, let's turn to the primitive peoples. No, of course not, because it was a very, you know, denigrating. But at the same time, we really need to learn from other cultures that are based on, you know, on loving. And loving is a communal effort. And hope is a communal effort too. And, you know, very much, as I said, the book, just going to read, sorry, I need to read this small quote, because I think it's just so relevant, and I need my glasses for this, okay? She says, this is Bell Hooks, and she says, to ensure human survival, this is a book from 2000, okay? To ensure human survival everywhere in the world, females and males organize themselves into communities. Communities sustain life, not nuclear families or the couple. So think about the extended families and therefore extended communities, and certainly not the rugged individualist. There is no better place to learn the art of loving than in community. And then, of course, she refers to one essential reference with Scott Peck and his book, The Different Drum. So think about that. We only human survival, but I wouldn't say only human survival. The survival of our world depends more and more on, on our awareness that we need to cooperate, but not only human beings. No, I do agree, and I do see it every day that other non-human forms are as crucial to ensure, the survival of this world as human beings are. And human beings are the ones who are, as always, the predators of this world and this world's riches. Okay, so I don't know if I answered to this, but that is my take on that, Sorry. So I think it was Macarena's turn, or Cristina, you want to say something? No, Macarena, then? Okay,
Hi.
Macarena. Hi, the floor is yours.
Okay, so you can hear me. Thank you so much for this amazing seminar. I was not planning to talk because we already have so many interventions, but then something really resonated, and I felt like it goes in the same line that the discussion we were having about what's our Western perspective and what's right or wrong in a very simplistic way, depending on that. So when Mar was at the beginning mentioning in her presentation that she was struggling with progress, we've been talking about that a lot, with the Judeo-Christian, I mean, not struggling, but wanting to span that. But then you were mentioning this distinction between fantasy and imagination that really caught my attention, and I want to think more about that, to think a little bit more about that. And then the fantasy one included escapism, and when I read the escapism word, I'm always thinking, because of this decolonial framework that I now have, I thought about Maroons and all these books I'm reading of Fugitive Feminism by Emejulu, or 10 Pillars. It has a really similar name, but I think it's Feminism of Fugitivity or something like that. But these two that are really connected to. So I was thinking, when you were talking about the ideas that we have of success and progress and how these are also connected to the Western perspective, I was thinking, is maybe escapism also a bad thing because of our Western perspective? Because, being a Maroon have been a form of resistance, and we can span that metaphorically, bigger. And I'm working with actually Maroon figures that emancipate since non-human figures. So it also connects with what we were saying, that emancipates from Capitalocene, Plantationocene. So I was just, curious about that. I don't even know if this is an answer. That's why I also a question. Sorry. That's why I was not sure about pointing at this. But then I don't know. Yes, some thoughts there.
Escapism. Let me talk about escapism. I think that is okay. You just reminded me of a friend of mine who said to me once, and she's from Bolivia, and she said to me, the problem with you, this general, you white people, you Western people, is that you have so much time in your hands. And you may say, or is the connection here? The connection, I think it is, when we are talking about survival, I mean, raw survival, like in the case of Maroons, historically, right? Many other, and Maria has also mentioned these many indigenous communities that that had to really, fight for life. I mean, for life, literally. I don't think that there is room for escapism there. But that is not true, because that is not true, actually, because then we have these wonderful creation myths, legends, stories, more contemporary tales in which escapism is a form of resistance. So I was talking about, escapism in shares conception. But I was saying before also, I think it was to Maria Porras in this case. I think I don't think I agree with fantasy being escapism only. I think there is much more to it, and probably there are many other layers to it. So I think it's part of how we could expand, fantasy, and I guess it's because we still have a very Western, and it's a very Western conception of escapism as not necessarily engaging with the world. But I think there are many forms of escapism that do respond to the queries, to the immediate queries of life. I don't know if you agree with this or I just overdoing it, but I think it's part of it. So I will stop there. Sorry. Thank you so much, Magdalena. Cristina?
Well, I wanted to say something because I thought that I would be the last person to speak. But I just saw that Angélica Rivadeneira raised her hand, but then she removed it. And now I can see Francisco Marquez wanting to contribute. I prefer leaving the floor to them, and then if there is time, I will say what I wanted to say in relation to the ideas being discussed here today. So if that's okay, maybe Angélica, I don't know if she just really wanted to say something or it was a mistake. And if not, Francisco, and if Francisco is the last one, I would like to say something at the end, but if not, Francisco.
I'll speak if no one else wants to speak, since I have already have a turn. But okay, I have to. The other thing I wanted to say at the beginning, and now Mar has reminded me of it, is that I also agree that fantasy is not merely escapist, because I happen to be a huge nerd of Tolkien's Middle Earth. And at least in the case of Tolkien, in the Lord of the Rings, there is this hope beyond hope, because indeed the situation was so terrible. Sauron's power was so pervasive, so terrible. It hits Frodo's mind in a monstrous way, and yet this is really, really, really improbable a chance of having the best end possible, that is brought with the final destruction of the One Ring. So I think that Tolkien's is not being escapist, at least in the Middle Earth fantasy. I don't think it's escapist. Maybe in other fictional worlds it can be, but in Middle Earth, in one hand, we face terrible evil in the shape of Sauron, of Morgoth, but on the other hand, there is also this hope that gives the final victory of good versus evil. So that's why I agree with Mark.
Well, thank you, Francisco. I think that Benjamin wanted to say something, and then we will move to Christina's last turn, I guess, because we are running a bit late, I guess. And if Christina, if you agree with this, Okay, perfect. So Benjamin, please.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to very, very briefly follow up with what Francisco said about fiction, and how I also agree that escapism in and of itself is not bad. It's not a damaging concept, because I know where we come from when we think about the idea of escapism as something bad, like, oh, he's always on other wars. He's always it's like the primordial Don Quixote, right? He's not in the war. He's not facing what is in front of him. But I also believe that every fiction, even though not mattering the quality of it, good, bad, I don't really care. Every piece of fiction that there is carries in it something from the other, and that something always says something positive, negative, critical about the moment in which it is produced. To relate it to comics, which is what I usually read, look at the X-Men, right? The X-Men is at face value, the X-Men is a comic about people with mutations that save the world from fantastic threats, right? But if you go a little bit further, you see that it's actually a critique, no matter how shallow or how deep it is, a critique of societal standards of the time, on how we reject those who are different from us. As I don't know if it's really something. It's just something that came to my mind. Although I don't know if I'm making sense. It's something I wanted to say. Something I wanted to add. Escapism, I think it's more positive than negative.
I completely agree with you in the sense of creativity. I mean, escapism is not necessarily bad, of course, at all, or damaging, but we need to define what kind of escapism we are talking about, I guess, because I think there are many forms of what we may consider escapism. Okay, but I completely, I have been thinking through all this session here. I have really understood why I did reject science